Another really big problem is India, right? So most Indians, right? I mean, the poorer class really is coming here, for what they say, right, an economic thing, which is what we hear from most of the people in Latin America. But there are members of ISIS flying on these flights. And the really interesting part is, I don't know if you remember in March, but one of the flights landed in Paris, and they're like, what the heck? Who are these 400 Indians on here? Like the French couldn't vet them. Well, what people don't realize is those flights have now been diverted and they're leaving India and they're going to Benghazi. So they go to Benghazi, Libya, and then they're flying to Nicaragua. So 2 weeks ago, two flights, so two like big Boeings, like the whole 400 people, they left from Benghazi on a local Libyan airline that basically only flies to Tunisia and Turkey, and they landed in Nicaragua. So like 800 Indians. So private chartered plane, it's not clear they went through any sort of vetting process, and everybody on both planes was to come to the US border. So we have to also look at these countries allowing these flights to land, allowing these unvetted persons that they know are just coming to go to our border. The US has a lot of carrots and sticks. Why aren't we putting more pressure on these Latin American countries, issuing these visas, offering these flight clearances? I'm sorry, Gadames Air it's like a dinky airline in Libya. Like, no country should be allowing it to land. To be honest, in Libya, one of a very senior terrorist actually owns an airline. Like, I wouldn't let a Libyan airline land on my soil to begin with. So it's just a huge problem.
Yeah, that's scary. And most of those individuals, first of all, the cost of what that is, who's paying that, which always concerns me. The farther the trip, who's paying that bill? And it blows my mind, because it's always a concern. Like, man, that someone has a lot of money. And for me, if you have that kind of money, why leave? You're the king of your own castle, wherever you're at. And so to come to our country, there's always a concern for me. I don't understand that. But not even that is, they're chartering down to Ecuador, and then they're making their way up through our borders. And then what? Like you said, there's no vetting system. Our system, I don't know how many countries we can actually identify their past history, right? Their past criminal history, but not a lot of them. And so people coming from India in that manner, yeah, those numbers have been through the roof as well recently.
Yeah, and like some countries we can't vet at all, like Syria, right? We have no relationship with that government. We can't vet them. But the really smart thing is, some of these people, like in Afghanistan, what they're doing is basically having these terrorists come in, and then they're checking their biometrics and making sure they were never in our system before sending them to our border. So they're pre-planning to ensure we don't have biometrics on the terrorists they're sending. So they're being smart about this too.
Man, that's that's crazy. I don't understand. Like, I guess, we've had 3 years of like massive influx of immigration, and there hasn't really been a serious threat. There's been small little gangs popping up, a lot of the shootings that are happening in New York, and some violence here and there. What is it that a terrorist organization is probably looking for the timing? Like, when would they strike? Or are they looking for an opportune time? I'm always curious, like, are they just sitting there? It's almost like I've called it before, like the Trojan horse. Like, are they just sitting here in America waiting for the right time to attack, or are they just coming to America and actually just trying to live a life and try and go straight? I don't understand it. And I'm just kind of curious, maybe is there intel out there that kind of has, an idea of why we're just kind of sitting stagnant right now with no threat currently?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to every group, unfortunately. We recently did have the strange situation, though, at the Marine base by the Jordanians. One was on the terrorist watch list. It's been completely covered up, right? But the thing is, so if we just talk Al-Qaeda, so Al-Qaeda senior leadership is based in Afghanistan. Basically, they do have a plot in place for the U.S. homeland. It's multiple coordinated plots. It's for 2025. And that timing is contingent on what happens in Gaza, because they are supplying a lot of new trainees and recruits right now to fight in Iraq and Syria. It's being completely covered up and only called ISIS, but they're attacking U.S. and Israeli interests there. So as of now, it's slotted for 2025. So they're basically pre-training and pre-deploying all the terrorists actually to the United States, but they've actually made a whole new model. So, in the old day, they would make like a terrorist cell, and then you'd have the leader of the cell, and then they would all train together, and then they knew what they're training for and would practice and all those things. Now they're pre-training, and one of the things they're pre-training in is, interestingly, urban warfare. They're forward deploying the commanders to the US, and they're also doing this to Europe. And then in the future, that commander will be the one that tells them, okay, this is what you're hitting. So even if you pull these people in the secondary, you might get them to admit they went to like an Al Qaeda training camp, but they have no clue what their target is. They don't. There's no way to get it out of them. They're not taught it in Afghanistan at camps because they don't want us to get ahead of it. So they've also been really smart about how they're preparing for the future attack. And this is going to basically be the big one. That's the retaliation, as you can imagine, for Osama bin Laden.
Oh man, I haven't thought about that, man. And that's just, that's just information from one country. I guess, is China a threat to us in America?
Yeah, I mean, China is a major threat to us, right? The scary thing about China, though, is they're patient, right? They'll spend 100 years to do their objective, So one of the things I've seen, they're really smart. What they did in Turkey is they kind of wanted like command and control of like the airport, right? So the interesting part is they started buying obviously all like the power lines around it. They paid for all the infrastructure of the roads. To even now where they run like the tower, right? When planes come in, the Chinese government basically run it. And so now the whole area within who knows how many miles of the main airport in Istanbul, the Chinese run, right? They're very smart about making sure they have this control of the infrastructure for when they need it, right? So we even see like simple things in Afghanistan because they're now in Kabul. They're wiring the entire city almost like a smart city with CCTV, right? Why are they really going to need that in Afghanistan? It's not for the Taliban; it's for the Chinese to be able to use it in the future for whatever they believe is going to happen. Obviously, they likely believe the Taliban will fall, and they're preparing for a future regardless. But other things they're doing there is like they've made a deal with the Iranians, for example, to move oil across Afghanistan to China. They're not even doing it yet. They're saying, hey, if the US does a blockade and we can't bring up oil from like Africa and South America, like we're going to need another place to do it in. And so that's like a dealer brokering, in Afghanistan, and no one's paying any attention to it. So China's very smart. They're thinking the long game, and it's a lot about infrastructure, right? Like if they control huge portions of our ports or huge parts of our electric grid, they can turn things off and shut things down when they need to, and if they need to, if a war happens. So that's the way we should look at China. Very long-term threat, very systematic, and they're way ahead of us in their planning, in preparation for this.
Yeah, I've kind of always thought like there's a weird psyop from them happening ongoing through social media, through film and television, through, so on and so forth, but also like the purchasing of land and supporting infrastructure down in South America, right? That's happening as we speak. And that's like, man, that's weird. But also purchasing of land here in America, inside, internally, right? And so all of that is a concern, you know what I mean? I think maybe the average person doesn't hear that. I know sometimes I'm surrounded by, people in the government who always talk. And so you hear these things, but those are all concerns of mine.